This is Honda Radio, spot title Funk RV2, model year 18 Civic, non-incentive, 25.5, at ID HKBR8000012, 25.5, full mix with a T-pop.
Honda believes you should expect more from your car. That's why the 2018 Civic LX sedan has more horsepower than a 2018 Sentra S. Here's a comparison. The Civic LX sedan. Now the Sentra S. If you want more from your car, come into your local Honda dealer and test drive the 2018 Civic today.
TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. Minnesota Vikings, the NFL, football, yeah, football. Welcome to Purple Podcast.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller here, along with former NFL quarterback Sage Rosenfels, and I am super excited about our Journeyman Quarterback of the Week. We will get to that in just a bit, but let's start out with a guy who is just beginning his career, Sage, in Josh Rosen. And I will tell you that leading up to the NFL draft, Josh Rosen was my favorite quarterback to watch his college film. I didn't think he had a very good team, but he looked like the guy that was most ready to step into the NFL. What did you see when he was going through that draft process in Josh Rosen?
Well, from what I saw, is just the ball comes out of his hand really nicely. He's got a really fluid throwing motion, and he's a very accurate thrower. He's really probably the most natural thrower, of this draft. And so he doesn't have the huge arm of Josh Allen or that crazy athleticism. He doesn't create and move around and make plays like Baker Mayfield. But as a guy who you think is going to be a consistent quarterback for a long time, I think Josh Rosen's going to be a good player. So we'll have to see. It's obviously very early in his career. I believe he had his first start last week or 2 weeks ago. So he's just starting his career, and he played really well. So he moves around a little bit in the pocket here and there, but really he's just your sort of classic, accurate, traditional pocket passer.
What did you make of some of the criticisms of him in the draft? Because I thought a lot of them seemed preposterous. Just, he's too smart. Like, what? at this position?
Yeah, he's an independent thinker, like he actually thinks about things other than football. Some of that stuff may have been put out by other agents of the other quarterbacks that try to knock him down in the draft. But I think that was nonsense. I do think he went a little bit lower than the other guys, just because he's not as sort of supremely talented. There's not this massive upside that you see with him. It's why Drew Brees fell in the draft. You didn't see that huge upside. With him, these checks where you can, check these different boxes on does he have this, and this, and this. There's things that he obviously misses. It's, top end athleticism, huge arm, all those things he does not have. And obviously, too smart, I guess that could be a new thing. But, I like who he is as a leader. I like that he sort of speaks his mind. His life is more than football. I think he's going to be a good player. I think it really does help that he is in Arizona in that division. He's from California originally, so it sort of makes sense that he'd be still in the West Coast playing in a dome.
So when you're working with young quarterbacks and you're talking to them about the mental makeup and the leadership and all those sorts of things, like what do you tell them about trying to make it and be the best leader they can be and stuff like that? I imagine you don't say don't be too smart, but there has to be some smoke there with him that maybe he matured into, but there is got to be some reason why those things were brought up.
I think it's because he would occasionally say something that quarterbacks don't talk about. He would bring other aspects of the world, I think, into sort of the conversation. Certainly, Aaron Rodgers does the same thing. He gets criticized for that too. So I think it was just more of that. He grew up with an affluent family. Very rarely do kids grow up rich that play in the NFL. Just sort of the way it goes. And he did grow up fairly rich. So I think people thought there might be a lack of motivation, almost desperation for him to become a great player, because if it doesn't work out, he'll still be just fine, with his inheritance or something like that. So I think people are just, searching for straws, grabbing at straws and looking for issues with them. But at the end of the day, we shall see. And, we shall see if he's a good quarterback. But as far as leadership is concerned, I think I always, sort of preach, you have to be the hardest worker in the room and those types of things, which is fine. But, as a quarterback, you're always on. Like, it's just it's like part of your character. You're just always a quarterback. You're a quarterback when you wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and you're a quarterback when you go to bed, and you're a quarterback everything in between. It's not just what you do at the football facility or what you do in the practice field or in the games. You sort of have to be a quarterback all the time, which, to much is given, much is expected. I think he's one of those types of guys that'll do the Cardinals right, on and off the field.
So when we look at what Josh Rosen is facing here in the Vikings defense and what he has to work with on offense, Larry Fitzgerald is still good. Christian Kirk looks like he's pretty good. David Johnson has a lot of talent. Their offensive line is starting Andre Smith at right tackle. And that just tells you everything about where their offensive line is. As a rookie quarterback, not given a throne of gold to work with. Because sometimes you see that, a rookie quarterback comes in and he's got a great team to step right into and then can have success fairly quickly. That's not going to be the case for Josh Rosen. What do you think is sort of the biggest challenge facing him when he doesn't exactly have weapons all over the field?
Yeah, that's the difference, is that, every quarterback that comes onto a new team, they're all put in different situations. The Buffalo situation's one thing, the Cleveland situation's another. When Ben Roethlisberger came into the league, he was on one of the best teams in football right off the bat. And usually quarterbacks end up on really bad football teams because they have, high draft picks. So this Arizona team is not the best Arizona team since Larry Fitzgerald's been there. It's probably one of the weaker teams. They've had, various, defenses in the past that were really good. I think this one's pretty average. The offensive line's a huge concern. We talk about offensive line all the time. That any team can have weapons on the outside or running back David Johnson. But if you don't have an offensive line, it's hard to operate and to do all the things that you want to do. You can drop all these great plays on Monday and Tuesday as an offensive coordinator, but if you can't pass protect, you can't run the football, all those plays are sort of worthless.
How does it impact a rookie differently than someone who's been around when they don't have a good offensive line?
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome, too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
Well, what you hope is that it doesn't impact them negatively, like long term. Everyone points to David Carr, and you start seeing ghosts when you're out there because you've been hit so many times. Mm-hmm. You start looking down at the rush. I think it's quarterback to quarterback, and there's an aspect of it too where you put a young guy out there and the team's not very good or the line's not very good, and he gets beat up, but he sort of earns the respect of the of his teammates. And so there's an aspect there too where it's okay sometimes to have a quarterback go out there, sort of get his butt kicked a little bit. So, he sort of gets knocked off his high horse, and, long term in his career, that type of toughness and grittiness will help him.
Let me switch over something I've been thinking about, and I was watching some film on last night about Kirk Cousins, and because the pressure is going to be still a big deal here. Arizona doesn't have some unbelievable defense, but Chandler Jones is one of the best players at his position, and based on the rest of the season, you can guarantee he's going to find himself in front of Kirk Cousins at some point, right? So what they did against Philly was they used a lot of these quick screens and quick passes and had success with them. What did you see from that, and what does it take to execute especially when it comes to using Stephon Diggs, the wide receiver screens and quick passes?
Well, it's people don't realize the timing of it is extremely important, and the way the offensive line gets out and the timing with the back. All screens have different sort of timing levels to them. Those quick wide receiver screens, you see those guards and tackles. And by the way, they have exact rules on who they're supposed to be blocking. They're not just sort of running out there and blocking anybody. They actually have, you've got number one, you've got the alley, you've got this guy. It's much more schematic than people realize. But the timing, a tight end screens where they block, and then they screen a lot of times. That's like a 3-second timing. A running back screen a lot of times a 2-second timing. The wide receiver screens are really just a jab and go for that offensive line, and then they got to get out. So, all screens are differently, but the timing, between the quarterback, the back, and the offensive line, takes a lot of practice, and the Vikings are very, very good at it.
Do you think it's sustainable? Because that's the thing I'm kind of looking at for an article is just like these plays have worked pretty well for them, and they worked against Philly, but there's also a play in the Philly game where Malcolm Jenkins easily sniffs one out. I mean, he sees the action from Cousins, and you see his head snap around immediately when he sees it and just runs right at Stephon Diggs and ends up making the tackle. And I wonder if Arizona has watched that on tape, how well they've executed those quick screens, that's ultimately going to get taken away.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is you throw a lot of wide receiver screens. The D-line doesn't rush as hard. So they're not up in the backfield. And so they don't have to then, change direction, run back and try to make the tackle and chase people down from behind. So, sometimes those receiver screens actually help the pass rush. So when you do drop back, they're a little bit worried about those wide receiver screens or running back screens. And so, we talked about this last week, I believe, and with the Vikings offensive line struggling a little bit, in pass protection. Is this something they're going to go to a lot, just like they did in 2016 when they felt they really couldn't run the ball well, they couldn't pass protect well. So you still got to get the ball to your weapons, and obviously you want to try to get the ball to Stephon Diggs as much as possible, and he's such a playmaker, and one of those ways is wide receiver screens.
Did I ask you this? I'm sorry if I asked you this already, but how are teams going to adjust to Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, or are they ever? I mean, maybe they're just too good, because there have been teams throughout history, Gary Clark and Art Monk, where nobody could ever figure out how to adapt to them, or Keenan McCardle and Jimmy Smith, they were just too good. And I guess, always fascinated by how defensive coordinators try to solve offenses, and we're seeing teams scrambling all across the league to slow down some of the things now. I'm just wondering if eventually there are teams who find ways to force them to throw Treadwell the ball.
Yeah, and that's the reason that the Vikings are one of the few teams who truly have sort of like 2 1s, amongst their wide receivers. A lot of teams have a 1, but they're looking for that number 2 that's dangerous enough to keep a defense honest. And the Vikings have 2 of those guys, and they have different skill sets. Adam Thielen's not a burner. Stephon Diggs does seem like he's a guy who's got obviously a lot of burst in his motor. So it's really, really important for offense to have 2 guys, because then sort of, as I said, sort of keeps the defense honest, and they can't really double team anybody. So defensively, the other thing you can do is play a lot of cover 2, which is sort of double teaming the wide receivers on the outside. But then you have that one-on-one matchup with that nickel linebacker on the inside. And then if you say move a Stephon Diggs inside and you change your coverage, to be more, doubling the inside guy, then you'd have Treadwell one-on-one on the outside. So there's different things defenses can do. That's the importance of having that third wide receiver. That's why it's so valuable.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about, like, if I'm playing this team, it's kind of like basketball where you go in saying, you know what, we're not going to let LeBron beat us. And then LeBron usually beats you because there's just nothing you can do. And in this case, with those 2, because they're so dynamic, because they could do so many things, you could say we're not going to let those 2 beat us, but ultimately that's probably going to happen anyway. I'm just always surprised when I see teams play a single high safety in certain situations. And I'm sitting there in the press box thinking, okay, well, whichever way that safety goes, the ball's going the opposite way to whoever is one-on-one, and they can win all those matchups.
Yeah, but there's, different things where, if you want to throw a lot of go routes, let's just say, because the team is waiting the safety on the left side of the field, you want to throw go outs to the right side. A lot of times the safeties in the corner sort of have that dialed up where the corner will play extra soft and sort of bail. So if there's going to be a go route, basically it's just going to be a straight up jump ball. He's not going to have his back turned to the offense, and it'll be an easy interception. So a lot of times those guys are on the same page of which way is the safety going to lean, and then the corner sort of plays. Defensively, he plays that, according to that plan. So there's, a lot of different aspects of how these guys work together and try to take away a team's best offensive player.
It's always interesting on a week-to-week basis, and I feel like Philadelphia wanted to just hit Kirk Cousins as much as they can and try to throw him off, but even when he wasn't perfectly accurate to either one of those guys, they were still able to bring it in.
It really is incredible, by the way, how often Cousins throws the ball from really like not hitching into his throw, just sort of flat-footed. He's got such a strong arm. That's a thing that I see more and more, it seems like, in these games, especially when they have all this pressure, is that he sort of throws the ball, what I call from a phone booth, where he doesn't have any sort of room to step forward. He just has to sort of twist in the pocket. But he's got such a strong arm, he can make those throws happen.
It is impressive. I mean, when you look at how far and how fast the ball has to go for him, and then I guess maybe I was just watching a lot of Case Keenum last year, but the throws, the velocity that he gets behind it, even in the tough situations, I feel like, especially with the fact that he knows he can't get murdered by the defensive player, it's going to be 15 yards, that helps him so much. Just wait till the very last second and be able to make those throws.
Yeah, he doesn't mind holding on to the football. That's for sure. It's not a hot potato in his arms, and we'll see as the season progresses if that continues, as he takes a lot of hits, and we'll see if the John DeFilippo doesn't want him to take those hits and tries to get the ball out, quicker and quicker.
Well, as long as the defensive player guides him to the ground politely, like Michael Bennett did every time, then maybe he won't be too concerned. I was talking with, or at least in press conference form with Cousins today. I was asking him about evaluating himself statistically, because context matters a lot. I mean, you can, like you brought up Ben Roethlisberger, you go through his early stats, and they're like, okay, these are not 5,000 yard seasons, but there's 14 wins. And they were clearly getting ahead, running the ball. Same thing with Keenum last year, getting ahead a lot, running the ball, not trying to throw for 4,000 or 5,000 yards. Well, Cousins so far has had to do that, so it kind of makes it difficult to evaluate a guy just based on those numbers. And he was talking about trying to look at different things to contextualize things and maybe even check himself if he thinks something's a problem, to use numbers that way. How did you use the stats in your preparation and even self-evaluation?
I tried not to worry too much about, my statistics or what I was, I don't know. I was never really a stats guy. I think there was times where I, knew I wanted to have a higher completion percentage. And so, as I was told my rookie year, you can't go broke taking a profit. So that was always a really important thing for me. And I threw at a really low completion percentage in college, like 51, 52%. So when I got into the NFL, the best way to stay around is to complete passes, let those athletes, sort of do their thing. But I tried not to get worried about, if I threw for 150 yards and we won the football game, I did my job. That's the way I always looked at it. And there's other games you got to throw for 300 yards and everything just sort of game to game. So, stats a lot of times are, sort of a big liar in a lot of ways. You see guys, whose teams are behind by 2 touchdowns. They put up great stats in the fourth quarter and looks like they have, they threw for 350 yards, but, they really played crappy and missed some key third downs early in the football game, which caused them to get behind. So I tried to worry about stats too much. I think that's just one of the things that fans can point to and media people can point to, because they don't really understand all the complexities, of football in the NFL game. It's hard to see when you're just watching the game.
Yeah, with those, sometimes this is what I've found in my own studying of quarterbacks, is that you can paint yourself a better picture by removing as much noise as you possibly can. So just an example would be like Teddy Bridgewater. He only throws 14 touchdowns, and everyone reminded him constantly of that on Twitter. Like, oh, he's only 14 touchdowns, can't be a franchise quarterback. Well, you look a little closer and they ran Adrian Peterson every time they got into the red zone. And there were a lot of times they were up in games where he opted to settle for a field goal that put them up 2 scores as opposed to taking any risks to get more yards. But when he was needed on 3rd down and longs, especially, he was averaging one of the best yards per attempt in the league. And that's where I think if you look at some of those situations, especially on 3rd downs, that you can get a clearer picture of who the best quarterbacks really are.
Yeah, it's all about those key situations. And, Gary Kubiak used to talk about, 1st and 2nd down, you're really just managing the game. 3rd down is why quarterbacks get paid. Your job is to execute and to make things happen on 3rd down. That's the most important down. That's sort of all on the quarterback. And 1st and 2nd down is sort of like don't screw it up. And so, yeah, not all completions are equal. But if you just look at the stats and you say, oh, the guy went 25 of 35, he had a really good game. But, if those 10 completions were key 3rd downs or just, key misses in the game, maybe wide open touchdowns, you'd have to say the guy may have had a terrible game.
And something that's really interesting with Kirk Cousins specifically is that he has variations of these, I guess, which wouldn't surprise anyone, of where sometimes he's been much better on 3rd downs than others. But one area where he has seemed to struggle, and the Vikings are not doing great this year so far, they're 18th in touchdown percentage, is in the red zone. And I wonder if it's which he made a fantastic throw to Adam Thielen in the red zone last game. So it's not that he's incapable. It's just throughout his career, there have been mostly downs with him in the red zone. And I wonder what the explanation for that might be. Like, could it just be a small sample size type of thing, that there's not a million trips that you make to the red zone, or if there's something that he should be doing better?
Well, I'm not sure. I think a lot of times with Washington, they were behind a lot of times. And so he was always I always thought he was having to be overly aggressive. And that's one of my concerns with the Vikings so far this year, is he's had to be a really aggressive quarterback. And when they signed him, I was sort of hoping that wasn't the case, that he wasn't going to have to be this guy to throw the ball 45 or even 50 times a game. Well, they've done that already this year. So, I think that was part of the issue in the past, was he was having to be really, really aggressive. Just because Washington was behind all the time.
So how are you feeling about this team now? Are you feeling like, okay, a lot of things are fixed, that they're in good shape, that they showed you something in Philly, that even though there were stretches where they didn't play perfectly, that, oh well, right? You take that win any way you can get it, and then the confidence is back within the locker room, and here they go on their way? Or is this another one where Vikings fans should go into it against Arizona and say, hey, look, they just lost to Buffalo a couple weeks ago, so this is no game where you're just expected to roll over another team?
No, I think the Vikings have a ways to go. They're not a finished product by any means. I think there's a process here with DiFilippo and Cousins as they really work to understand each other, work to understand this offense entirely. And truly mesh. The defense is not there yet. They were very imperfect in that game. They obviously got helped by a couple of those turnovers that were huge. I mean, those are basically 14 points in that football game, or even more than that. You're talking about, one taking 7 points off the board that would probably have been a touchdown on the fumble. And then, the interception, they were driving for at least a field goal, if not a touchdown. So you're talking about maybe almost 21 points in that game. Which occurred on two different, bad plays by the Eagles. And so the Eagles did not play well. That's my biggest concern, I guess, is the Eagles really played poorly. And the Vikings played really well, but the Eagles also played very, very poorly. And it wasn't one of those games where two teams played really well. The Vikings were just better than the world champions. The world champions beat themselves a little bit on Sunday.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when I was looking back at the tape, there were a lot of plays that the Eagles were having success on the Vikings defense, and they were moving the ball, and they did rip off, 20, 30-yard plays a number of times, which has been a bit of an Achilles heel for the Vikings. And, there were a couple of drops. The running back drops one at the 3-yard line, which should have been a first down and goal, and that ends up being a field goal. So it was a lot of Philadelphia beating themselves, and I agree, the Vikings have a lot to prove. And in this second quarter of the season, was that a real thing, or is that just a thing they say to us? Like, hey, we look at it like quarters of the season, first quarter, second quarter?
No, that's a real thing.
That's a real thing? Okay.
Yeah, that's a real thing. I mean, you don't, it's not something that you sit there and talk about all the time, but you sort of have The first 4 games of the year, the middle 4 games, you get to the midway point, you sort of take a breather. It's like sort of like it's halftime. There's a lot, that can occur in the second half. Most teams are still in the hunt, at that point. And then, as they always say in football, you have to finish. It's all about finishing drives, finishing games, finishing the play the right way. So when you get to that like fourth quarter of the season, whatever's happened the first 3 quarters, let's finish this season the right way, whether that's to get in the playoffs or even if you're terrible, like, let's just, end the year on a good note, try to get some momentum going into the next year. We're all fighting for our jobs. And yeah, they really do break it up into 4-game groups a lot of times. You'll sort of look at the schedule. Obviously, you want to win them all, but there's times where, hey, if we can go 3-1 in the next 4 games, that puts us in, a great position to go to the playoffs. And so, football is very regimented and organized that way. And that is definitely a real thing when they talk about quarters. At least coaches do. Well,
that's exactly how I'm looking at it now, is that the first part of the season was really tough. And now in this sort of second quarter, you have the Eagles where you get the win, and then you've got the Saints in this too, and they look pretty unstoppable, especially on offense right now. Their defense looked a hell of a lot better the other night against Washington. But you also got these couple of games in here that are very winnable in Arizona and the New York Jets. And it's one of those, you have to take care of business. And if you go 3-1 in this second quarter, then you are in great shape for the rest of the season, especially since the NFC North just isn't anywhere near as good as we thought it was going to be.
The NFC North, I actually think the NFC North has 4 good teams. I think that they're going to beat each other up, and, the winner is probably going to have 10 wins, maybe 11 at the most. But I think they really do have 4 good football teams. Now, the NFC East, with the Cowboys and the Eagles and the Giants.
4 bad teams.
I don't think the Eagles are a bad team. But yeah, they don't have 4 good teams. That's for dang sure. I mean, that conference, or that division, I should say, are being the entire division has a negative point differential. They all have losing records right now, I believe. So, that's a division that just has 4 not very good teams right now. I do think the Eagles are a really good football team. I think they're going to be there when it's all said and done, but I think the NFC North is actually, pretty loaded. Just no one's great, but I don't think anyone's terrible either.
All right, let's do it here. This is an all-timer, like the definition of a journeyman quarterback.
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome, too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
Show some respect.
Listen, bud,
salute.
I've traveled every road in this here land.
It's time for Matthew and Sage to honor one of the NFL's great journeyman quarterbacks.
He had perhaps his greatest moment against the Minnesota Vikings as an Arizona Cardinal back in 2004. It is Josh McCown, which people who remember it led a game-winning drive against the Vikings to boot the Vikings out of the playoffs with a beautiful, brilliant throw into the end zone and a famous call by their play-by-play broadcaster, which people still go back on YouTube and watch. So tell me your thoughts on one Josh McCown, our journeyman quarterback of the week.
He is the epitome of, quality journeyman backup. I mean, the guy's been everywhere, played for like 9 teams. Let me look at it here. The Arizona Cardinals, Detroit, Oakland, Miami, Carolina, the Hartford Colonels.
Yes, that was
San Francisco 49ers.
UFL? Was the Hartford Colonels UFL?
Whatever they call it. The 49ers, the Bears, the Buccaneers, the Browns, and now the Jets. And I promise you, at each one of those places, he was well liked by everybody in the organization, players, coaches. everybody that's a key to being a journeyman backup. Be really likable. All right. He's also at that point now where, at the end of the career, he has played off and on, and sometimes more than others. Had a really good year a few years ago with the Jets. Last year with the Jets had a really solid year. But he's always sort of had that spot on the roster where if they brought in somebody else, it would be a clean and fair and friendly competition. And he's always been a team first guy. So, Josh McCown he might be the king of the journeyman backup quarterbacks.
Yes. He is I don't know whether to call him the GOAT journeyman quarterback, but he is the sheer definition. Put it this way, you know how the NBA logo has Jerry West? Journeyman quarterback logo is Josh McCown's cutout.
That would be a good one. The thing about Josh is, he was always, and Fitzmagic is sort of like that too. Is that he can get hot. He can he can throw 4 touchdowns in a game. He also he's a natural gunslinger. He also might throw 4 interceptions in the game. I mean, that's he's not always the most consistent quarterback, which is why he was sort of a journeyman backup. I mean, he's made a ton of money. He's been a starter a lot in his career, but for the most part, he was a guy who was either competing to start for the starting job, or was just the straight backup, which is what he is, currently with the New York Jets.
So occasionally brilliant is a box that every journeyman has to check off, right? That for whatever
you have to have a
section
brilliant
of time,
moment.
Yeah.
You have to have a brilliant moment or two to sort of laugh, because then a coach or a GM can go, well, 3 years ago he had this amazing game.
Yes.
And that he could do that again for us if we sign him. So it's part of your your career life expectancy is to have certain moments that last you to push you forward.
And for McCown in 2013, he had a bunch of them where he threw 13 touchdowns, 1 pick, 109 quarterback rating. And if you're familiar with QBR, it's a 1 to 100. He had an 83 that year, which is outrageously good. No one sustains an 83 for any long section of time. And Josh McCown was brilliant, earned himself the starting job with Tampa Bay and went 1-10 because Tampa Bay was really bad. And then he regressed back to McCowning. And what you said with him being a gunslinger, those are my favorite journeyman quarterbacks who are not just a guy who's going to come in and check down, but also a guy who's willing to be well, they put me in, so here it goes. And
you might as well go for it. I think that's contagious, though. He sort of always had a not really a carefree mentality, but sort of all right, next play up, let's go get the next one mentality. I think there's something about that sort of a short memory. Can I add, by the way, 2011? I think this is important when you talk about the king of journeyman backups. 2010 he plays for 2008 he's playing for the Carolina Panthers, and then 2010, so he was out of football. He's playing for the Hartford Colonels. 2011 he signs a 1-year deal with the 49ers, gets released, and not till the end of that year, and this is where Vikings fans may sort of remember him a second time. He signs back with the Bears to back up Caleb Haney after Jay Cutler gets hurt. All right. And what's crazy about that is the guy's basically been out of football for a couple of years here. And so he's backing up. Haney gets hurt, and McCown went in and blew it up and played, absolutely fantastic. That's great. And a lot of people thought that, he should be, the starter and stuff. Cutler, not long after that. You're talking about the Mark Trestman era in Chicago, and Cutler wasn't playing all that great. McCown was, but of course, Cutler had the huge contract, and he got the job, and McCown moved on to Tampa.
So in the game against the Vikings, he beat Minnesota 17-13 and only threw for 160 yards, but got the job done that day. And that's another, he checks all the boxes. He's like the AJ Green prospect level of journeyman backup quarterbacks, like AJ Green with the size and the speed and the go up and get it and athleticism. McCown is all these things because at some point you had to have sports talk radio callers calling shows and saying our journeyman should be the franchise guy, right? That's every journeyman at some point has had that. And couple more little facts for you that I think you will love. So of all the time that they've been keeping the NFL Combine, the most athletic quarterback. So if you take all the things that correlate to success for a quarterback, whether it's 40 time, how high they jump, all that stuff, most athletic is Cam Newton. If you're taking height into account, all that, right? Number 2 is Josh McCown.
Incredible.
Yep.
That's surprising. You know, he's a very good athlete, and is his brother Luke McCown, who would also be on our conversation list maybe at some point. Maybe we talk about the Saints and we talk about Luke McCown, his younger brother. But
yes,
both those guys are great athletes. I mean, Luke, I heard stories that Luke McCown, you know, sometimes these practice facilities have a gym in them, and Luke McCown would be doing like 360s and reverse slam dunks. An incredible athlete. I'm sure Josh has a lot of that same athleticism. So he's always had a really much stronger arm than people realize. He's got a really quick release, throws a great ball. And yeah, he's definitely a gunslinger and definitely a really good athlete.
Yep. Joe Thomas called Josh McCown the best basketball player that he had ever played football with. So there you go. And last one is a quote from an article on Josh McCown where he says that his when he was 16 years old, his driver's license read that he was 5'4", and a coach of his said, "We knew Josh was going to be a good football player if he ever grew."
Wow. 5'4", 16.
That's great. The Wikipedias always have gems on these guys. Well, another one.
He's got an extra long Wikipedia because he's been so many places.
I know. Yeah, it's a little longer than Coy Detmer's. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, shout outs to Josh McCown for an incredible backup quarterback career, and I am sure a career in the future as an NFL coach. So, all right, Sage, we will talk again after whatever happens with Arizona, and then the Jets are another great team I'm looking forward to with Journeyman Quarterbacks. So many, including McCown.
Well, every team has a lot of them, and we opened up Arizona, and we're like, well, I know McCown played for them. He's like the best one to play for. And the Vikings fans obviously remember that playoff game where he threw that touchdown pass at the end and ended the Vikings' hopes of going to the playoffs, or not the playoff game, but the last game of the year, ended the Vikings' chances of going to the playoffs. So that was sort of a dagger in the hearts of Vikings fans. So I'm glad we covered Josh McCown. Now everyone else is sort of second best. They're the backup to the backup.
That's right. It'd be like doing a basketball podcast and talking about Jordan. Now everybody else just doesn't look the same. So, all right, Sage. Well, thank you as always for your time, and thank you all for listening to the Purple Podcast.
This is Honda Radio, spot title Funk RV2, model year 18 Civic, non-incentive, 25.5. Ad ID HKBR8000012. 25.5, full mix with T-Pop.
Honda believes you should expect more from your car. That's why the 2018 Civic LX sedan has more horsepower than a 2018 Sentra S. Here's a comparison. The Civic LX sedan. Now the Sentra S. If you want more from your car, come into your local Honda dealer and test drive the 2018 Civic today.
Michael moves in. I'm Ed Donahue with an AP News Minute.
Michael's made landfall and is a very strong Category 4 hurricane, maximum winds of 155 miles per hour. Landfall happened right around 12:30 Central Daylight Time between Mexico Beach, Florida, and Tyndall Air Force Base.
Michael Brennan is at the National Hurricane Center. Caleb Green decided not to evacuate from Michael in Panama City, Florida.
I don't know. I'm not too worried about it. It's kind of fun. I don't know. It's not really too bad. Not right now, at least. It's coming up pretty good.
But President Trump is worried about people who did not evacuate.
We're doing a lot of different things to try and remove people from the area, but a lot of people are very poor in certain of those areas, and it's very tough for them to leave.
Officials in South Carolina say they're more worried about tornadoes than flooding from Michael. Forecasters say tornadoes are possible through the Florida Panhandle, southeast Georgia, and southern South Carolina through tomorrow as Michael moves inland. I'm Ed Donahue.